My husband, David, and his mother, Jane, humiliated me and threw me out of my own home while I was terribly sick. They thought a broken, frail woman like me would just disappear. So, months later, when I returned to that door, the look on his face when he saw me, strong and healthy, was priceless. But it was the man standing next to me, his estranged brother Arthur, who made him drop his wine glass. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The fever was a cruel thief, stealing my strength and blurring the edges of the world. For 3 days, I had been adrift in a sea of aches and shivers, a severe case of influenza that had settled deep in my bones. I was 45, a freelance grant writer, and my entire career was built on meticulous research and the steady clack of a keyboard. Now I could barely lift my head from the pillow, and my laptop lay dormant on the desk I loved, a desk bought with the inheritance my grandmother had left me. In fact, most of this house, the polished oak floors, the wide bay windows, the antique desk itself, had been purchased with that inheritance. It was my sanctuary. David, my husband of 10 years, had been distant. He and his mother, Jane, had been spending an unusual amount of time together, their voices low and conspiratorial in the kitchen downstairs. I'd attributed his coolness to the stress of his latest real estate development and Jane's constant presence to her motherly concern. I was, it turned out, a fool. It was just after 2 in the morning when the bedroom light snapped on, stabbing my sensitive eyes. "Get up, Bethany." David's voice was flat, devoid of the warmth I once knew. I squinted, my body screaming in protest. "David, what is it? Is something wrong?" He wasn't alone. Jane was standing behind him, her arms crossed, wearing a silk dressing gown. Her face, usually pinched in a mask of passive disapproval, was alive with a cold, triumphant energy. "It's over," David said. He walked to the closet and pulled out a small suitcase I hadn't seen in years. He tossed it onto the bed, jarring my aching body. "We're done. I want you out." The words didn't make sense. It was the fever, I thought, a nightmare. "What are you talking about? David, I'm sick. I can't. I don't understand." "Oh, she understands," Jane spat, stepping forward. "She's just not as good at playing dumb as she is at playing the victim. You've been a drain on my son for a decade, Bethany, living in his house, pretending to be useful with your little writing projects while he does the real work." "His house," my voice was a raw croak. "David, this house was bought with my inheritance. We both know that." David wouldn't meet my eyes. He was busy pulling random clothes from my drawers. "Things have changed, Bethany. The house is mine. It's all in my name now, has been for a while." "That's not possible," I whispered, panic finally cutting through the fog of my illness. "I would have had to sign. David, look at me." He finally did. His eyes were not the eyes of the man I'd married. They were cold, flat, and empty. "You're a guest who has overstayed her welcome. My mother is right. You're a leech. And we're done." He zipped the bag and threw it at my feet. "Get dressed, now." "David, please," I begged, trying to sit up. The room spun violently and I fell back against the pillows. "I'm burning up. I can't go anywhere. Whatever this is, can't it wait until morning? Until I'm well?" Jane laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "That's the whole point, dear. We don't want you here when you're well. We want you gone. David has been patient long enough." "Patient?" I cried, tears of disbelief and feverish weakness streaming down my face. "I've supported him. When his first development project failed, I used my own savings to keep us afloat. I wrote the grants that funded his first successful company." "Ancient history," David scoffed. "You're living in the past, Bethany. The future is mine, and it doesn't include you." He grabbed my arm, his fingers biting into my flesh, and hauled me out of the bed. The sudden movement sent a wave of nausea through me, and I collapsed onto the floor, the cold would a shock against my skin. "She's pathetic," Jane said, nudging the suitcase with her foot. "Get her out of here, David. I want to have the locks changed before breakfast." He didn't help me up. He just stood there, waiting. Get dressed and get out, or I'll call the police and have you removed for trespassing. Trespassing, the word was absurd, in my own home. Not your home, he said, his voice final. Not anymore. Shivering, humiliated, and sicker than I had ever been in my life, I fumbled into a pair of sweatpants and a coat. I had no shoes, just the slippers on my feet. I packed nothing. The bag he packed for me contained a random assortment of summer clothes and old toiletries. It was a final act of cruelty. He walked me to the front door. Jane was right behind him, a smug smile on her face. David opened the door and gestured into the freezing night air. Goodbye, Bethany. He tossed the suitcase onto the porch. It landed in a wet patch of icy rain. I stood on the threshold, swaying, my body on fire. I looked at the man I had loved, the man I had built a life with, and I saw a stranger. I saw a monster. You won't get away with this, I whispered, the words barely audible. David just smiled. I already have. He and Jane closed the door in my face. The click of the deadbolt sliding into place was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I stood there for a long time, in the rain, in the middle of the night, too sick to move and too shocked to cry. I was alone, homeless, and betrayed. The betrayal was worse than the illness itself. The first hour was a blur of cold and disbelief. I sat on the wet porch steps, my small suitcase beside me, the icy rain soaking through my coat. My teeth chattered so violently I thought they would break. I had my phone, but my hands were shaking too badly to unlock it. Who would I even call at 2:30 in the morning? My mind, clouded by fever, kept replaying the scene. David's empty eyes, Jane's triumphant smirk. Not your home, not anymore. I couldn't stay here. I would literally die of exposure. With a groan, I pulled myself up using the railing. Every joint throbbed. I managed to call a rideshare, my voice a rasping whisper as I gave the address of my old university friend, Sarah, who lived 30 minutes away. When the car arrived, the driver looked at me, a woman in slippers and a coat, shivering on a curb at 2:30 a.m. with a single bag and his eyes filled with pity. I couldn't bear it. I just looked out the window, watching my beautiful home, my home, disappear into the rain. Sarah was shocked, of course. She opened her door in a bathrobe, her sleep-filled eyes widening in horror at the sight of me. She half-carried me inside, sat me on her sofa, and wrapped me in 3 blankets. My God, Bethany, you're burning up. What happened? Who did this to you? I tried to explain, but the words came out as a jumbled mess. David, Jane, they kicked me out, said the house was his, said I was trespassing. Sarah's face hardened. She was a no-nonsense ER nurse, and she immediately went into triage mode. She took my temperature, 103.4. She forced me to drink water and swallow 2 fever reducers. She put me in her guest bed, and I fell into a dark, suffocating sleep. I stayed with Sarah for a week, drifting in and out of consciousness. The flu, combined with the shock, had knocked me flat. Sarah was my angel, spoon-feeding me broth, forcing me to hydrate, and sitting with me while I cried, not with sadness, but with a weak, bewildering rage. On the 4th day, when the fever had finally broken, I tried to call David. What did I need? An explanation? To beg? No, I needed to tell him he was a fool. The call went straight to voicemail. His generic, "You've reached David," message had been replaced. "Hi, you've reached David and Jane," his voice chirped, obnoxiously upbeat. "We're currently unavailable, probably enjoying our new life. Leave a message or don't. It's up to you." David and Jane, not David and Bethany. The sickness rose in my throat again. I tried to access our joint bank account. Access denied. I tried my credit card, the one linked to the joint account. Card deactivated. He hadn't just kicked me out, he was erasing me. "That monster," Sarah seethed, placing a cup of tea in my trembling hands. "Bethany, you have to call a lawyer, right now." "I know," I whispered, "but he said the house was in his name. How could he do that? I would have to sign papers." I thought back. David, a real estate developer, handled all our finances. He said I was too creative for numbers and that I should focus on my writing. I, in my trusting stupidity, had let him. I'd signed stacks of papers over the years, refinancing documents, tax forms, investment portfolios. Had I signed my entire life away on a document he'd slipped into the pile? The humiliation was overwhelming. Jane had called me a leech. David had called me a guest. They had reduced my entire contribution to our marriage, my inheritance, my financial support when he was failing, to nothing. I sat up, the room spinning a little. He's not just a monster, Sarah. He's an arrogant monster. And so is she. They think I'm just some fragile artist they can throw away. You are a fragile artist right now, Sarah said gently. You're sick, you're in shock. I am, I agreed, a new, cold feeling starting to replace the weakness. But they've made a mistake. They threw me out with nothing. I looked at my phone, then at the laptop Sarah had lent me. They kicked me out, but they didn't kick out M. Why brain? My mind, the one I used to weave complex grant proposals and research obscure historical facts, began to clear. The fog of sickness was lifting, and in its place, a sharp, cold clarity was settling in. They thought I was weak. They thought I was beaten. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten who I was before I met David. They had forgotten my skills. And, most importantly, they had forgotten about the one person in David's family who despised Jane even more than I did. The one person who I had helped, in secret, long ago. I picked up the phone. I wasn't calling a random lawyer from a bus advertisement. I was calling the one person David and Jane believed had disappeared forever. Sarah, I said, my voice stronger, can you get me a coffee, a large black one? I have to find Arthur. Before I met David, I was fiercely independent. I had built a successful, if quiet, career as a freelance grant writer. My specialty was securing funding for historical preservation projects. It was niche, painstaking work that required me to be part bloodhound, part bookworm, and part legal scholar. I loved it. I was good at it. When my grandmother passed, she left me a substantial inheritance, a reward she'd written in her will for a life lived with meticulous care. I met David at a fundraiser I had helped organize. He was charming, ambitious, and seemed to admire my intellect. He was a fledgling real estate developer, full of grand ideas but short on capital. His mother, Jane, had been a dark cloud from day one. I remember our first meeting vividly. She looked at my sensible shoes and my linen dress with open disdain. A grant writer, she'd said, tasting the words as if they were sour. How quaint. David, dear, you need a partner, not a project. David had laughed it off, but that dynamic was set in stone. To Jane, I was the mousy, intellectual woman who had somehow trapped her golden boy son. And when I used my inheritance as the down payment on our beautiful, sprawling home, a home David had found as a perfect investment, her resentment calcified into something darker. Worse, in the early years of our marriage, David's grand ideas crumbled. His first solo development went bankrupt. He was shattered, and his confidence, the very thing that had attracted me, was gone. Jane had blamed me, of course. You're a distraction, she'd told me. You're not pushing him hard enough. But I hadn't listened. I dipped into my own savings, the money I'd earned, not inherited, and I'd kept us afloat for 2 years. I'd poured my research skills into his business, finding obscure zoning grants and tax incentives that he'd missed. I practically wrote the business plan that secured the funding for his second, wildly successful, company. He'd been grateful at first, but as his success grew, his gratitude faded. He became the self-made man. My contributions were forgotten, rewritten as minor help. Jane, of course, fanned the flames. It's all your vision, David, she'd coo. Bethany was just lucky to be along for the ride. Now, sitting in Sarah's guest room, that history felt like a knife in my back. I had not been his partner. I had been his fuel. And now that he had what he wanted, he and his mother had discarded the empty container. Jane was the true architect of this. She was a woman who lived in a world of surfaces. Her hair was always perfectly coiffed, her nails impeccably manicured. She spoke with a polished, upper-crust accent that belied her middle-class origins. Her profession was, and always had been, matriarch. She had dedicated her life to controlling her son, and she saw my inheritance not as my own, but as a family asset she had been wrongly denied access to. I remembered a dinner party 6 months ago. An investor David was trying to impress had asked me about my work. As I began to explain a complex historical grant I'd just secured, Jane had cut me off with a tinkling laugh. "Oh, Bethany and her dusty old books," she'd said, patting my hand. "She's so sweet, but David is the real brains of this operation. Aren't you, darling? He's the one changing the skyline, while Bethany just reads about it." David had just smiled and raised his glass, basking in the praise. He'd let her humiliate me. He'd let her reduce me to a hobby. That was the moment I should have seen it. That was the moment he'd already left me. My fingers, still weak, dialed a number I knew by heart, a number I hadn't called in over a year. It rang once. Twice. "Hello," the voice was deep, clipped, and professional. "Arthur," I whispered. There was a pause. "Bethany, is that you? My God, you sound terrible. What's wrong?" Arthur, David's older brother, the black sheep, the family failure. Arthur was the opposite of David in every way, quiet, intensely bright, and utterly immune to their mother's manipulations. Jane had despised him for it, when Arthur had wanted to go to law school instead of joining the family business, which, at the time, was a failing hardware store. She had cut him off completely. What Jane and David never knew was that I had been the one to help him. 10 years ago, shortly after David and I were married, Arthur had come to me desperate. He'd been accepted to a top-tier law school but couldn't secure the full loan. I, flush with my inheritance and an admirer of his quiet integrity, had written him a check for his entire first-year tuition. It was a secret, a gift. "Don't tell David or your mother," I'd told him. "Just make something of yourself." He'd graduated at the top of his class and vanished into a high-powered corporate law firm in another state. He'd sent me a simple, beautiful card every year on my birthday. "I never forget," his last one read. Now, my voice cracking, I told him everything. The illness, the 2 a.m. confrontation, the forged documents, the humiliation. For a full minute, there was silence on the other end of the line. I thought he might have hung up. "Arthur, are you there?" "Bethany," he said, and his voice was no longer the calm, professional one. It was something else. It was cold steel. "I'm on the next flight. Do not contact David. Do not try to access any accounts. Don't speak to anyone. I will be at your friend's house in 4 hours. And Bethany." "Yes." They have forgotten who we are. Arthur arrived at Sarah's apartment like a controlled storm. He was taller than I remembered, and the quiet, bookish man I'd helped send to law school had been replaced by someone with an air of absolute, unshakable authority. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, and his eyes, when he saw me pale and wrapped in a blanket, held a flash of protective fury that startled me. "Bethany," he said, setting his briefcase down. He didn't hug me, he wasn't the hugging type. Instead, he gave me a firm nod. "You look awful, let's fix that." Sarah, ever the nurse, offered him coffee. He accepted with a brief, polite smile, then turned to me. "Okay, from the beginning, I want every detail." For the next 2 hours, I talked, and for the first time, I wasn't a fragile artist. I was a researcher. I was a grant writer. I was an archivist. I gave him dates, I recalled specific conversations, I detailed the financial history of our marriage. I told him about the successful grants I'd written for David, the inheritance I'd invested, the stacks of papers I'd signed. "I was so stupid," I finished, the shame washing over me again. I trusted him. Arthur held up a hand. "Stop, you weren't stupid. You were married, there's a difference. Stupidity is what they did." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a legal pad. "They were sloppy, Bethany. Arrogance always makes people sloppy. Now, you said the house was bought with your inheritance. Where is the paperwork?" "That's the problem," I said, my heart sinking. "It's at the house, in my desk, along with all my files, my laptop, everything." "Not everything," Arthur said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "You're a grant writer. You deal with sensitive financial documents all the time. You have backups, don't you? It hit me like a lightning bolt. My office, I whispered. I didn't just work from home. I rented a small, secure archival office downtown where I kept my most sensitive files and a fireproof safe for original documents. It was my quiet space, the one place Jane never visited because it was too dusty. And my private server, I said, my mind racing. I back up everything to a secure, off-site server. Tax returns, deeds, bank statements, even the initial purchase agreement for the house. I scanned it when we bought it. It's all there. Arthur's smile widened. I knew it. Your meticulous archivist brain just saved you. David and Jane, in their infinite wisdom, threw out the librarian but left the library standing. He stood up. Get dressed. We're going to your office. The air in my small, climate-controlled office was still and smelled faintly of old paper and ink. It was my real sanctuary. Within 10 minutes, we had it all. The original wire transfer confirmation from my inheritance account to the title company, the preliminary purchase agreement, and most importantly, the final, signed closing documents. We spread them out on the large oak table. Arthur's eyes scanned the pages with terrifying speed. Here, he said, tapping a signature line on the closing statement. That's your signature, is it? I looked closely. It looks like mine, but I don't remember signing this particular page separately. You didn't, Arthur said. He pulled a magnifying glass from his briefcase. Look at the ink, it's flawless, too flawless, and look at the pressure. It's uniform. This is a high-quality digital scan and print. He copied your signature from another document and superimposed it onto this one. This is a forgery. A very good one, but a forgery nonetheless. He then pointed to another document I'd never seen before. A quitclaim deed. Dated 6 months ago, it transferred my entire stake in the property to David. My signature was at the bottom. This, Arthur said, is the weapon. He must have had a notary in his pocket. He filed this, got you off the title, and then, I'm betting, took out a massive line of credit against the house. He and my dear mother are probably planning a very long, very expensive trip. So what do? I asked, my hands shaking. Now, we let them get comfortable, Arthur said, packing the documents carefully into his briefcase. You are going to a hotel, a nice one. You are going to eat, sleep, and get your strength back. I, meanwhile, am going to hire a private investigator and a forensic accountant. Hi. David is a real estate developer. He's arrogant, but he's not a criminal mastermind. He's a puppet. My mother is pulling the strings, but to forge a deed and get a notary to sign off, he needed help. I want to know who that notary was. I want to know where the money from that line of credit went. I want to know everything. They think you're a sick, broken woman who crawled away to die. We're going to let them believe that, right up until the moment we take it all back. For the next month, I lived in a quiet corporate apartment that Arthur's firm kept on retainer. I did exactly as he said. I ate. I slept. I went for long walks. I bought new clothes. I felt my health returning, and with it, a cold, hard resolve I didn't know I possessed. Arthur, meanwhile, was a whirlwind. He hired a gruff ex-cop named Mike, who discovered that the notary on the quitclaim deed was David's own assistant, a young woman who had received a bonus of $20,000 the following week. The forensic accountant found the new bank account. It was in David's name only, and it held nearly $500,000, the equity line he'd taken out on my house. He's planning to liquidate, Arthur explained to me over dinner 2 months after the expulsion. I was healthy now, my color returned, my eyes clear. He's selling the house. In fact, a cash offer just came through. He's set to close in 2 weeks. We have to stop him, I said. Oh, we will, Arthur said, taking a calm sip of his wine. But not yet. The PI found something else. David has a new development project in the Cayman Islands. He and Jane have first-class, one-way tickets booked for the day after the house closes. They are planning to take the money from the sale, add it to the fraudulent equity line, and disappear. They're planning to leave the country with everything. That's millions, I whispered. It is, Arthur said. And it's wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated forgery. It's a federal case. David isn't just looking at a lawsuit, Bethany, he's looking at prison. He leaned forward. They are having a celebration dinner tonight, at the house. A little goodbye party with a few of his investors. I think it's time we delivered our response. Tonight, my heart hammered. Tonight, he smiled. Are you ready, Bethany? It's time to go home. The drive to the house was silent. My hands were clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white. Arthur drove his sleek, unassuming sedan, his face perfectly calm, as if he were driving to a simple business meeting and not a life-altering confrontation with the family that had disowned him. As we turned onto my street, I saw it. The house was blazing with light. Cars I didn't recognize, a Porsche, a new Mercedes were parked in the driveway. Laughter, tinny and bright, drifted through the closed windows. He's celebrating, I whispered, a fresh wave of sickness rising in my throat. He's celebrating getting rid of me. He's celebrating his own arrogance, Arthur corrected me, his voice firm. Remember the plan, you say nothing. You let me handle the opening. You are not the victim tonight, Bethany. You are the victor. Look at him, but see him for what he is, a common thief. He parked the car at the curb. We walked up the stone path, the one I had picked out myself. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to stand tall. I had spent 2 months visualizing this moment, but the reality of it was terrifying. Arthur didn't knock, he simply pressed the doorbell. We heard the chime, and then the laughter inside quieted. Footsteps approached the door. I could see a silhouette through the frosted glass. My heart stopped. The door swung open. David stood there, a glass of red wine in his hand. He was tan, wearing an expensive new suit, his hair perfectly styled. He looked happy. He looked at me and his face, for a split second, registered confusion. Then it morphed into a cruel, arrogant smirk. Bethany, my God, you look better. I almost didn't recognize you. What are you doing here? Come to beg for scraps. I just stared at him, my expression blank just as Arthur had instructed. My silence. My lack of tears, my healthy appearance, it unnerved him. His smirk wavered. What? Did you finally find a lawyer? Good luck. The house is sold. Everything is finalized. You have no claim on anything. Hello, David, Arthur said, stepping forward from the shadows of the porch. David's eyes shifted from me to the man standing beside me. His gaze traveled up the perfectly tailored suit to Arthur's cold, impassive face. The color drained from David's world. His mouth fell open. The smirk vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He didn't just recognize his brother, he recognized the man his mother had always called a worthless, book-smart failure. And that failure was now staring at him with the eyes of a predator. Crash! The wine glass slipped from his nerveless fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor of the foyer, splashing red wine across the white baseboards. Arthur, David choked out, What are you doing here with her? That's Bethany, David. Your wife, Arthur said, his voice cutting through the silence. The woman whose signature you forged, the woman whose inheritance you stole, the woman you and my mother threw out of her own home while she was sick. From behind David, Jane appeared, a plate of appetizers in her hand. David, darling, who is it? You're letting in oh. She saw me, her face hardened into its familiar mask of contempt. I told you, David, she would come crawling back. You have 5 seconds to leave, Bethany, or I will call the police for trespassing. Then she saw Arthur. Jane's reaction was even more profound than David's. She dropped the plate. Shrimp and crackers scattered across the floor. She hissed, her voice trembling with a lifetime of venom. How dare you show your face here? Get out of my son's house. It's not his house, Mother, Arthur said, stepping past the stunned David and into the foyer. I followed, standing just behind his shoulder. A few well-dressed couples, David's investors, were staring at us from the living room. What is the meaning of this? Jane demanded, her composure cracking. This, Arthur said, pulling a thick document from his briefcase, "is an emergency court injunction, freezing the sale of this property. And this," he pulled out a second document, "is a copy of a criminal complaint we filed this afternoon with the U.S. Attorney's Office for wire fraud, bank fraud, and forgery." David finally found his voice, a high-pitched, panicked squeak. That's a lie, it's a bluff, you can't. She signed the papers, she signed everything." "She signed nothing, David," I said, my voice clear and strong, surprising even myself. "You forged my name, you forged a quitclaim deed." "You can't prove that," David yelled, his face turning a blotchy red. "It's my word against hers, and she's a broke, hysterical woman." "Is she?" Arthur asked calmly. "Because we have a sworn affidavit from your notary, David. The one you paid $20,000 to. She was more than happy to cooperate in exchange for immunity. We also have the full report from a forensic accountant tracing the $500,000 equity line you took out, illegally, and put into a private, offshore prepped account. The same account you planned to fund with the fraudulent sale of this house. The same account you were going to use when you and your mother fled to the Cayman Islands. The tickets are for Tuesday, aren't they?" David looked as if he'd been shot. He stared at his brother, then at his mother, then at me. Jane, however, was a cornered animal. "Lies," she shrieked. "All lies, David, he's lying. He's always been jealous of you. He's trying to ruin you. Call the police. Tell them these two lunatics are threatening you." "Go ahead, David," Arthur invited, gesturing to the phone. "Call them, please. It will make serving the arrest warrant that much easier. The detectives are, in fact, waiting at the end of the street." David's entire body began to shake. The investors in the living room were now standing, grabbing their coats. "David, what is he talking about?" one of them asked, his voice sharp. "He's talking," Arthur announced, his voice rising to project to the entire room, "about how David and his mother, Jane, conspired to defraud his wife, Bethany. He's talking about how they kicked her out, sick, to steal her home. He's talking about forgery. He's talking about a federal crime." David didn't lunge at Arthur. He lunged at me. "You," he screamed, his face a mask of primal rage. "You did this, you." He never finished the sentence. Arthur, with a speed that defied his calm exterior, stepped between us, grabbed David by the front of his expensive suit, and slammed him back against the wall. "Don't you ever touch her again," Arthur snarled, his face inches from his brother's. "This is over. You've lost. You and her, it's done." He released David, who slid down the wall into a apathetic, whimpering heap on the floor, surrounded by shattered glass and spilled shrimp. Jane just stared, her mouth open, for the first time in her life, utterly, completely silent. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. The investors fled, muttering about legal exposure and calling their lawyers. They didn't even say goodbye. They saw the fraud for what it was, and they wanted no part of it. David remained a sobbing, blubbering mess on the floor. But Jane, after her initial shock, recovered with terrifying speed. "You think you've won?" she hissed at me, her eyes narrow slits of pure hatred. "You think you can come in here with this failure," she spat the word at Arthur, "and take my son's life away? He earned this house. He worked for it." "He earned it," I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. "He earned it by using my inheritance as a down payment. He earned it by having me bail out his first company with my savings. He earned it by having me, his useless wife, write the grants that built his entire career." "Lies, you have no proof," Jane shrieked. "Mother, stop," David whimpered from the floor. He knows about the notary. He knows about the bank account. He knows about the tickets." "He knows everything, Jane," Arthur said, stepping forward. He was no longer the furious older brother. He was the cold, calculating lawyer. "We have the bank records. We have the travel itinerary. We have the sworn testimony. This isn't a family squabble. It's a multi-count felony indictment. The only person David is talking to next is a federal prosecutor." Jane's face went white. The mention of federal prison of a prosecutor finally broke through her wall of denial. She turned on David. "You idiot," she screamed, kicking his leg. You useless, stupid boy, I told you to be more careful. I told you she was smarter than she looked. You told me to do it, David shrieked back, scrambling to his feet. It was your idea. She's weak, David, she'll just roll over. It's our money, David. You pushed me, you planned it all. That, Arthur said, with a grim smile, is called conspiracy, and it's wonderful that you're both confessing. It'll save the U.S. attorney a lot of time. He pulled out his phone. As I said, the detectives are waiting. He made the call. Within 2 minutes, 2 plainclothes detectives were walking through the still-open front door. They surveyed the scene, the shattered glass, the scattered food, Jane and David standing opposite me and Arthur like 2 warring factions. David and Jane, the older detective asked. Arthur nodded. The detectives moved forward. You are both under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and aggravated forgery. The sound Jane made was something inhuman, a strangled, high-pitched wail of pure, astonished rage. You can't arrest me. I'm 70 years old. I haven't done anything. David just put his hands behind his back and sobbed. Watching them be led away in handcuffs out of my house was the most surreal moment of my life. It wasn't triumphant. It was just pathetic. All that cruelty, all that arrogance, all that meticulous planning, undone in an instant. But it wasn't over. The arrest was just the beginning. The next few months were a blur of legal proceedings. Arthur was magnificent. He was my shield and my sword. He handled the depositions, the filings, and the prosecutors. The case against David and Jane was, as Arthur had predicted, ironclad. The moment the prosecutor laid out the evidence, the forged deed, the notary's testimony, the bank records, the plane tickets, David's defense lawyer immediately pushed for a plea bargain. Jane, however, fought. She hired her own lawyer and tried to pin everything on David. She claimed she was just a confused old woman who had been manipulated by her son. This is where my own skills came back into play. Arthur asked me, "What else do you have? I need to break her. I need to prove intent." So I went back to my archives, not just my financial records, but my digital ones, emails, text messages. For 10 years, Jane had been sending me little suggestions that, when read individually, seemed harmless. But when I compiled them, Bethany, dear, you should really let David handle all the boring house papers. Your creative mind shouldn't be cluttered. David works so hard. Don't you think all the major assets should be in his name? It just looks better, more professional. That inheritance was a lovely little bonus for you, but it's really David's now, as the man of the house. I printed out dozens of them. I compiled them into a single, damning timeline. I gave them to Arthur. The plea bargain David had been offered was contingent on his full and honest testimony. Arthur's team presented my file of emails to David's lawyer. He saw his mother's manipulation laid bare, in her own words. He saw that she would sacrifice him to save herself. The spell broke. David, to save himself from a maximum sentence, turned on his mother completely. He confessed to everything. He admitted under oath that she had been the architect of the entire plan. She had found the crooked notary. She had suggested the offshore account. She had, he claimed, been poisoning him against me for their entire marriage. Jane's defense collapsed. Faced with her own son's testimony and her own words, she, too, was forced to plead guilty. The case was over. The battle was won, but there was one last thing to do. They're having the sentencing hearing tomorrow, Arthur told me, meeting me at my apartment. It's a formality at this point. They've both plead. You don't have to go. You can just let this be over. I looked at him, the man who had saved me. The man who had been my secret, loyal friend for a decade. "Oh, I'm going," I said, putting on my coat. "I need to see this. I need to close the loop, but we're not going to the courthouse. Not yet." "Where are we going?" he asked. "We're going to dinner," I said, smiling. "A celebration at my house." The house was mine again. The injunction had frozen the fraudulent sale, and with David and Jane's guilty pleas, the title was restored, the equity line was erased, and the home was unequivocally, legally, and morally my own. It was, however, empty, and it felt cold. The cleaning company I'd hired had scrubbed away the last traces of David and Jane. The shattered wine glass, the spilled food, it was all gone. But the memory of the betrayal lingered like a phantom limb. The house was no longer a home. It was just a house. "It feels strange," I said to Arthur, standing in the foyer where David had dropped his glass. "I thought this would feel like a victory. It just feels quiet." "It's not the house you miss, Bethany," Arthur said gently. "It's the idea of the house, the life you thought you had. You can't get that back, but you can build something new." He was right. I had spent so much time, energy, and rage focused on getting the house back, I hadn't thought about what I would do once I had it. We didn't have a celebratory dinner there. We ordered pizza and sat on the floor of the empty living room, talking. We didn't talk about the case, or about David, or about Jane. We talked about his life, his work, his quiet satisfaction in winning impossible cases. We talked about my work, about a new grant I was considering writing for a museum, about my plans for the future. "I might sell this place," I said, looking around. "It's too big, too full of them." "You could," Arthur agreed, "or you could fill it with new things, better things." The next day, we went to the sentencing. The courtroom was sterile and mostly empty. Just a few court officers, the lawyers, and us. I sat in the front row, with Arthur beside me. I was wearing a simple, professional blue dress. I felt calm. Then they brought them in. David looked terrible. He was pale, gaunt, and looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He was wearing an ill-fitting suit. He saw me, and he quickly looked away, his face a mask of shame. Jane was another story. Even in an orange jumpsuit, she was defiant. Her hair was messy, her makeup gone, but her eyes were still burning with that same arrogant fire. She stared at me, and if looks could kill, I would have been dust. She didn't look ashamed. She looked furious that she had been caught. The judge read the statements. He spoke of the calculated cruelty of their actions. He spoke of the brazen and malicious nature of the fraud. David was given a chance to speak. He stood, his voice trembling. "Your Honor, I know what I did was wrong. I was influenced. I was weak. And I am so sorry. Bethany." He turned to me, his eyes pleading. "Bethany, I am so sorry. I never meant to." "You never meant to get caught, David," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the silent room. He flinched and sat down. Then it was Jane's turn. "I have nothing to say," she snapped. "I am the victim here. My son is weak, and that woman," she pointed at me, "is a vindictive, evil person. She turned my sons against each other. She is the one who should be in jail." The judge looked at her over his glasses. "Ms. Jane, your lack of remorse is, frankly, astonishing. I have seen your emails to your daughter-in-law. I have read your son's testimony. You were not a victim. You were the architect of a cruel and calculated crime against a family member." He delivered the sentence. Because David had cooperated, he received a lighter sentence, 3 years in a minimum security federal prison. Jane, due to her age but also her complete lack of remorse and her clear role as the ringleader, received the same, 3 years. As the officers led her away, she stopped right in front of my row. She locked eyes with me. "You'll never be happy," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You'll be alone in that big, empty house. You've destroyed my family. You've destroyed everything." I stood up so we were face to face, only the wooden railing separating us. I looked at this hateful, broken woman who had tried to ruin me, and I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel rage. I just felt pity. "You're wrong, Jane," I said, my voice calm and clear. "I haven't destroyed a family. I've just exposed what was already broken. And you didn't destroy me. You just reminded me of who I am." I turned to Arthur, who was standing beside me. I reached out and took his hand. It was a simple, public gesture of alliance, of loyalty. "You see, Jane," I said, looking back at her. "I'm not alone. I'm with the only part of your family that was ever worth a damn." Jane's face contorted in a mask of silent, incoherent rage. The guard pulled her arm, and she was led away. David, watching all of this, just wept. The aftermath of the sentencing was quiet. The legal trouble, the financial ruin, it was all definitive. David and Jane were gone. Their assets were seized to pay the legal fees and the penalties for the fraud. They had lost everything, just as they had tried to make me lose everything. I did sell the house. I realized, standing in that courtroom, that Jane was half right about one thing. I would have been alone in that big, empty house. It wasn't my sanctuary anymore. It was a monument to a life that had been a lie. I sold it 2 months later. I took the money, all of it, my inheritance and the equity, and I split it. I bought a beautiful, smaller condo in the city, one with a view of the park and a study filled with sunlight. It was all mine. The locks were mine. The deed was mine. The other half of the money, I used to create a foundation. The Meticulous Care Grant, I called it, after my grandmother's will. It was a fund dedicated to providing legal aid and financial support to women who had been victims of domestic financial fraud. My new purpose. I would use my grant writing skills, my research abilities, to help women who, like me, had been blindsided, but who, unlike me, didn't have a secret lawyer brother-in-law to call. Arthur and I remained a constant in each other's lives. Our relationship was not romantic, it was something deeper. It was a bond forged in loyalty and a shared, quiet understanding of what it meant to be the sensible one in a family of emotional vampires. He became the brother I'd never had, and I, the sister he'd always deserved. He served on the board of my new foundation, his legal mind a priceless asset. I saw him one afternoon, about a year after the sentencing. I was dropping off some case files at his office. "You look good, Bethany," he said, smiling as I came in. "I feel good," I replied. "The foundation just won its first major case. We helped a woman in Ohio get her farm back from her ex-husband. He'd done the same thing David did, forged a quitclaim deed." "You're a force of nature," he said, pouring me a coffee. "I had a good teacher," I said. "By the way, I got a letter." I pulled it from my bag. It was from David from prison. It was a long, rambling, self-pitying letter. He was eligible for parole soon. He said he was changed. He said he missed me. He asked if I could find it in my heart to visit him. Arthur read it, his expression unreadable. "What are you going to do?" I took the letter from his hand. I walked over to his Ophisto shredder and fed it through. The machine whined, turning the cheap paper into confetti. "That's what I'm going to do," I said. I had found my peace. It wasn't in revenge or even in justice. It was in the quiet, meticulous work of building a new life, a better life, on the ruins of the old. David and Jane had tried to erase me. Instead, they had set me free. They were in their prisons of steel and concrete, but I was finally, truly out of mine.